Hello, welcome to today's HR Huddle, and I'm Tamera Loerzel, and with me is my colleague Samantha Mansfield. Thanks for being here today, Sam.
Oh, my pleasure.
And we thought we would talk about performance reviews. Probably just happened for a lot of firms, and so we've done performance reviews. Now what? Now what are we doing with the feedback? How are we assimilating it? How are we getting some specific actions and goals even set? And what kind of resources do people need? And it can be very easy to kind of get into the lull of the summer. I know we're experiencing that a little bit, with the Fourth of July holiday and vacations and everything else happening. So we just thought we would, take some time to strategize. And, for the HR professionals that listen to this, or those of you leading talent initiatives or leading groups of people, to say, what should we do to, I guess, keep our foot on the pedal, of the work we just did on performance reviews and the feedback that we gave. And part of it is with the individuals that got the feedback, but then also part of it's going to be with the coaches or career advisors to say, what should they be focusing on? What do we need to be prompting them with? Or, maybe providing them with some coaching or training or ideas, and say, how do we keep some momentum going, and break it down into some bite-sized pieces so it feels doable and we don't all save it until a year from now. Or if you do biannual, performance reviews, that you save it till December 31st when everybody else is going to set, their timelines and goals. So, with that said, I think that's, the first thing is making sure that we did clear expectations about what's next out of the performance reviews. I guess I'll start there. And if we didn't do that, we probably need to go back and do that. Maybe we're capturing it in our HRIS system, and maybe we have documented, all the appropriate parties have been copied. But then we would say, now what is expected? Let's talk from the participant perspective. What's the expectation? Are we setting goals out of the performance review? Are we setting learning plans, looking for CPE, looking for experiential opportunities, looking for coaching opportunities? Maybe there's things we need to go back and review, and talk to some partners or engagement managers. But what's the next action that they're supposed to be taking out of the performance reviews that we just did? And so, Sam, do you want to add on to that?
Well, I think something valuable to note is that so many times we hear people are hungry for feedback, right? And so this might be one of the pivotal points during the year where they really get feedback, and hopefully it's good detail. Everybody is comfortable doing that during performance review. But let's say that this is where they're getting feedback. I think the next thing that's valuable to note is that especially the younger generations, and I think it was Gallup that had a report on this, is that they were showing how your Gen Z and your millennials, part of what keeps them in a job is if they have development taking place and they're improving. And that's part of what cements them. And so many firms are really trying hard to make sure they are retaining that group. Millennials, especially because millennials in their 40s. So they are those managers, they are supervisors, they're becoming partners. And so knowing that that's so important to them to make sure that they are developing, I just thought this was really valuable to make sure that we don't take this really great time of year where we share feedback, but then it goes quiet, or we don't give people more direction on how to improve it. Because if they knew how to improve it themselves, they probably would have already done it, right? So how do we make this improvement plan more collaborative? And so one of the things we really talked about is making sure that we actually set goals out of this. Instead of here's the feedback, here are your met expectations or exceeded or, could improve and those kinds of things, which is great. But then what is it that I do to improve in some of those areas? And so one thing that we can share, and Caroline, I think you'll do this for us, is share with everybody our goal planning worksheet. But the key is to not just hand this to the person who got the feedback and say, okay, write your goals for that, but really make it something that the manager, or maybe the manager doesn't feel comfortable with knowing what to do. So maybe you as HR leaders help with how do we put actions to those plans. And so that was just something that we were talking about, of where the leaders in the organizations can come together and keep the development and the feedback going, as opposed to it being anchored to these review periods.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think on the goal setting, idea, I love that you're saying like a development plan. That's really what it should be. The review, performance reviews should be like 10 minutes. And then what we should really be focusing on is, what's next and how do you want to progress in your career? What, learning needs to occur. What are you interested in learning? What do we need you to learn? How do we, provide that? What kind of goals do you have? And, there's behavior goals. So there could be like, how do I grow as a professional? It might be in my communication or in visibility or speaking up, or maybe my communication is harsh, or maybe my communication is missing. And so figuring out like what that might look like. And then there is probably technical growth. And often in performance reviews, we see keep doing what you're doing or continue to grow technically. That is not helpful. We need more specificity. So if it did not happen in the review, that's where the manager or HR can come in and say, okay, if they were going to grow technically, what next? Where? What portions of the audit? Where in the tax? Do they need to learn partnerships? What do they need to learn? On the advisory, what kind of engagements do they need to get exposed to? And how can we break that down into bite-sized pieces so they could get experience to grow technically? Maybe, they're going to be a supervisor. They got promoted to supervisor in this, round. Well, what does that mean? And anybody that got promoted, what is it? What is the difference between being a senior and a supervisor? What's the difference between being a supervisor and a manager, or a manager and a senior manager, and up to partner, obviously. And so that we can say, okay, here's what's next in your competencies or job description or both. And so we can say, all right, here's maybe some training you're going to need around supervising people or managing workload of multiple people or practice economics. And also, by the way, we need to teach everybody around us what the difference is between seniors and supervisors and managers and senior managers, because I already am using Samantha as a senior. And then that doesn't change. She gets promoted and nothing changed in how she's operating or what she's doing. So again, that level of specificity, of what the expectation is and how they can continue to develop and progress. And by the way, while we're saying all that, it's like 3 to 5 goals max. Yeah. It's not that many. And there's many steps underneath it that they could take to achieve those goals. And that's where our goal setting worksheet, you'll see, question 2 says, what are the steps to take? And that's where we can get some specificity, because like people development, you're like, well, that I can't run a report on. I can't, measure that in hours or dollars, or, how do I measure that? I can measure it in those steps and those activities and check off that they did that. So that can be very helpful for you to break that down and get some specificity of what they need to do. And then that leads to resources, Samantha. I think that you were going to, share some ideas on, we also need to find resources for these guys then too.
Yeah. Well, and if I can just play off of a couple of things that you just said there too, because like when you said people development, that's a big nugget. There's a lot of things in there. And you may have somebody that's excellent one-on-one, and they're not so great doing like the group development, or maybe they're excellent with first years, but they don't connect as well with the more experienced. And so instead of, to your point on the specificity, let's be specific with them of, is it a weakness that we want to fix, or do we want to set a goal on, you are really great here and our team really needs more focus here. And so let's build that plan of how you can build your strength and really apply it, right? Something like that. So I love where you were talking about that specificity, because that is such a big nugget on, you need to improve on people development or business development. That's an enormous nugget to suddenly feel like I have to go attack. And it can be intimidating and it can feel overwhelming. And then we don't see the progress that we're seeing in people, because it just feels like I don't even know how to crack that nut. It's so big. And
And
where,
I'm going to pause right there. I want to add something right there because I think that's another piece we need to look at is it's so big and like business development. It's like, that is not what I went to school for. That is not why I became an accountant or a consultant. And I have this picture of what I think a business developer is, and that's not me. And I have to customize it to that individual. We do that in our Rainmaker development program for emerging leaders is we get them to see all the components of business development, much of what they're already doing, by the way, and they don't consider it that. But how do we tailor it to them, to their practice area, to their personality, to their, work-life balance, to what the firm needs, and create a custom plan for them. And so that's what we need to do with these goals is tailor it because they are big and massive. And that was just a really good example. So I wanted to pause and break that out there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that because I do think that's one of those just terms that will show up in reviews
Yes.
that we could do so much more in our follow up in helping them to find their path. And then where we want to also follow up, especially in some of those things like that too, is you talked about, well, what do you want out of your career? And do you like people development? Do you like business development? Do you like more the operational side and the technology and all of that? What do you want? And you might get this just blank stare of people saying, I don't know. And what I hear some leaders is that they get nervous when they hear some of their younger professionals say, I don't know what I want out of my career. And one thing I want to say is let's not have a knee jerk reaction to that. Let's help them figure out what they want in their career, right? Let's help them by asking questions. And with these goals, do they need to go try different things? Are they feeling like they're in the wrong seat? Maybe I'm not feeling like I'm the greatest auditor in the world, and maybe advisory something that I want to go experiment and see if that feels more natural to me, so something like that. And I just wanted to say, because I do hear that sometimes in the coaching that we do of more senior people, that when they ask that question, they can get frustrated or get scared that their younger professionals don't know what they want. And let's take that as an opportunity to look at, okay, well, here's your performance review, or here's where you seem to be excelling. And what is it you really like about what you're doing? And maybe that plays into the goals as well. And then, like you said, let's start identifying resources to help you figure that out. So do we set you up mentoring with a partner that's in another service line that you haven't had exposure to, or that maybe has some tendencies that are similar to the person you're working with? And maybe their path looks more like something they could start to envision for themselves. But starting to make introductions and connections is just one example of how you can let them know of resources. There's so many others, so I want to pause and give you a chance to do.
Well, I think that's important. I'm just going to take one step further, like the introductions. I also would let the leadership group know out of our performance review season, we may be reaching out to you for some experiential opportunities. And we want you to be receptive to that. Let's look for opportunities. You should look on your team as well. And we should be collaborating together. And we might not be as formal or intentional about that as we could be, but we should raise it up and say it's an expectation, so leaders are expecting it, but also it'll have them be thinking about where else could we be creating those opportunities for that exposure, or like I said, that experiential opportunities, etc. And then looking for where can we create opportunities for learning, and it could be within the firm, it could be doing some case studies together. We could be doing some recordings of learning that we're doing for an individual that it's like, okay, that whole group of seniors needs it, or we could be, pulling together. I know many firms do like a tax day or an audit day or an advisory day. And we include a combination of what I'm going to call leadership skills, development, technical skills, maybe business acumen skills, throw a little fun in there. Yes. If we're going to invest in a whole day, how we can, provide those opportunities. And then obviously, external programs, leadership programs, or, Rainmaker development programs, or, whatever it might be. And if you're mapping that to your competencies, if HR is starting to do that, you could provide, a list of maybe approved resources. They could always come in and say, hey, we ran across this one and get approval as well. But then they have kind of a guide to help their people, and they don't have to like invent it all by themselves and be thinking about it. And I think that's super helpful for your managers, your career advisors, to have those kinds of tools available. But we're not, then you just get together and say, what are the common things that we're looking for, and then what are the one-off for the individuals that we need to figure out how to accommodate and develop them in certain ways.
Yeah. So I love what you were saying, because go especially to those managers, right? Because they're just really starting to make that cusp of maybe they are controlling bigger budgets, and now they have to start making decisions on where do training dollars go for my team or the service line, depending on the size of your firm and how that all those decisions are all made. But man, that would be a great conversation to have with them of, here's how you can make those decisions. Or if we don't have something, but you really see your team needs it, talk to the manager about, here's how you could organize something for your team, or come to us and maybe there's another team that's also needing something similar, and then you could have it organized. But too often we sit there in our own little circle or our own little group and try to figure it out or ignore it, because I don't know what resources are there, right? And as HR professionals, honestly, it's probably one of the more frustrating things for you, because you probably feel like you're communicating all the time about resources that are out there, and here are programs that we have, or here's how you could get somebody into whatever appropriate training. But just remember, it does not stay front of mind. And so you being proactive in the communication, especially right now after this performance review time, so valuable to go remind managers and partners and supervisors that are given this feedback how they can use resources or ask for resources to put into the plan for their team. Yeah. And I just thought that is something to really emphasize. And you said something earlier too about like competency plans and those sorts of things. And somebody may have heard that and thought, we don't have any of that yet, right? Yeah. So that's another one. Just don't let it stop you. That's okay if that's not all structured. Let's make sure that doesn't prevent us from still putting together these goals and plans for individuals. And maybe as you start pulling together what people are trying to work on, you start seeing the themes, and that's how you can start building those competency models if they don't exist in your firm today. So it hit me when you said that earlier. Yes. That somebody may be sitting there going, we don't have any of that. And it's okay. Everybody starts somewhere. And so this goal setting right after the conversations you've had is a really valuable place to start.
Yep. Yep. And if you don't have competencies, by the way, we have some competency models. You can reach out to us and ask for as the samples, but also job descriptions. And you could say, well, we don't even have full job descriptions. And that's where, Samantha is like, okay, well, here are the responsibilities of a supervisor. Here's the responsibilities of a senior, et cetera, where we can start capturing that. So we can start to distinguish, how do we elevate people? What's next? Are we able to do that? And the job description is probably too general anyway. It'll give you directional where to go, but I got to look like by engagement. What is a senior doing that's different than what its manager is doing? And what is a manager doing that's different than a senior manager or a partner that's doing that? And so you do need to make those lists, that Samantha was talking about. The other resource I want to acknowledge is the manager or career advisor. And that's one of the things to maybe huddle with them and say, okay, now what are you going to do? Once we've done these performance reviews, one is a goal setting, worksheet. Another is continue one-on-one huddles, whether you're doing a monthly or, what that is. And those could be just short check-ins. And then maybe quarterly, trimester, 4 months, some kind of regular period, not once a year. Twice a year is probably not enough either, that they're formally sitting down and saying, how are you progressing on your development plan? And sometimes they've checked it off. And we got to say, okay, now what's next?
And celebrate it.
And celebrate it. Yes,
Celebrate it.
exactly. And sometimes they're stuck or procrastinating. And we're going to have to say, okay, what are you worried about? What are you afraid of? Why are we not moving that forward? What's happening? And troubleshoot with them. And help them just take a couple steps, and then maybe meet in 2 weeks for 15 minutes and say, okay, now here's the next steps. Especially if it's like a big scary thing, or it's like business development and they're like, that's not me. How do we facilitate that so they can take some steps and have some small wins to celebrate, and get momentum going where they're not having momentum? So it's one size fits one. Each person is going to be at a different place and is going to progress things differently, and they're going to even progress each of their individual goals differently. So somebody needs to be meeting with them to support them through that, and that is a big resource. And we might need to revisit, we probably need to revisit with our managers or career advisors to talk about what does that look like, and get some structures in place for that to be successful.
Well, and Tamera, I even did a blog just a couple weeks ago on It Takes a Village. And so there are some tips in that blog on how to be that coach. And maybe you're feeling like, I just don't have time, or managers or partners are pushing back saying, I don't have time. Feel free to use that blog because it gives some tips, and it doesn't have to be this huge lift, but it can make such a difference. To your point, those career advisors make such a difference.
Yes.
So that's a new blog that we just put out, I think 2 weeks ago, that may be beneficial.
Awesome. Well, hopefully this gives you some ideas, to go back and say, how can we get the most out of the performance reviews that you invest in and take time, and other people take time to, communicate. And remember, your people, especially your, Gen Z, young millennials, they really do want, a development plan. They want to know how they're being invested in, what actions they can take. And so keep the momentum going, and put the structures in place that you need to be able to do that. Communicate expectations, get your leaders involved, and go from there. And reach out to us with any questions you might have, or any resources that you might want from us. We are available to you. So otherwise, have a great week, and we will see you on next week's HR Huddle. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks so much.